After we've got the initial bounce effect set up, we probably want to run a few additional state requests to determine how we treat the particles in each state. I want to be able to create strands for when the particles interact with the surface so that I can get the elongated streak of sparks. I'm going to need to apply a create strands compound on the emit from surface compound in order to set this up. But the problem in doing so is that the create strands compound will create strands for both state 0, the state the particles are born into, and for the second state where the particles are spawned. I also have these particles lasting for quite a long time, these spawned particles. They don't actually die out. So I might also want to put in a condition that kills those particles in state 1 at an age limit. I already have delete particle at age limit here, so let's just kind of clean up the amount of particles and how long they can live for before we focus on anything else. So if I look up the age category, I'll set a particle age limit and execute that on spawn, and I'll set the age limit to about half a second. And as for the number of particles, I don't want the spawn rate multiplied by the force with which they collide, because there's an incredible amount of force with a bullet impact. I want a more closely user-definable spawn rate. So you can see that this already works a little better. We're getting more sparking coming off the particles. They're still living for a little too long, but that's something that's easy to control. I could also probably go into the spawn on collision, and as far as the speed multiplier goes, I don't want them taking the speed of their parent, of the original laser. So I'll take the speed multiplier down, so the particles can't travel nearly as far. Okay, so let's try that. Yeah, I think that's working out okay. It also looks like I'm spawning particles that are about the right size. So now let's take that. So what I'm actually doing is I'm spawning particles that are of the same type as the state 0 laser blast. So I'm spawning long cylinders in much the same way. And I want to have strands that work in the same fashion. So to do this, I'll pull in the create strands compound and connect it to the emit from surface, but I'm again going to have to run a state check to see whether or not the particles are in state 0 in their cylindrical state or in state 1, the spawn on collision state, and only apply strands in that state. So I could copy and paste the 3 if equals get state ID for use up here. In fact, it might not be a bad idea to build this as a little compound that you can pull in. I find I'm always having to access different state IDs and apply different effects. So let's look up the strand compounds. Create strands. And only if the state ID is equal to state 1 do we want to create the strands. So we'll execute that if true. Later on in our graph, after we've spawned on collision, we will have 2 different states after this third port has been evaluated. So from the bounce off surface, we then proceed to execute and spawn on collision. So this is state 1. So after this, we can do another evaluation. So I'll do a copy paste. Again, I still have the if equals get particle state ID in my buffer here. And the real way to control particles is after you've created strands is to generate strand trails that follow those initial particles. So something like that. And again, here we're testing for a particle state ID, and if we're in particle state ID 1, then we generate strand trails. Okay, so I'm getting some fairly long looking particles. So what I can do when I'm working with strand trails is to shorten the lengths. And as far as the strands go, we can choose to lower the number of segments and lower the strand length as well. The other thing that you have to control when you're working with particles is that the shape must be set to segment. In our first emit from surface compound, our shape is cylindrical, but on the second spawn-on collision, we want to set our shape to segment. So I'll look for a shape compound, set particle shape, and I'll execute that as a segment type shape. Segment is the only render type that can actually work with strands. Let's try that again. Okay, so now I'm getting the effect of the strands. You can see that they're not really disconnecting from their emission point. So this is where you have to simply just go in and keep editing the strands until you've got the appropriate size. So I have a feeling it's back down here under my strand length, under my max number of segments. I'll take that number down. So you can see how they just kind of shoot off now. I can increase the length of my segments, and I might even have to go in here. I'll go back into my create strands again, and I'll increase the number of segments so that the particles have more subdivisions to describe their length. It might also be an interesting idea to add in a little bit of gravity and some forces as well. The particles are simply moving upwards. The sparks would carry downwards, as far as I'm concerned, unless we are dealing with glancing blows. So let's look at setting that up next.